You feel pain like no other pain, and you know that in your life it's going to be very difficult to...
Prince William entered the private hearing, expecting a dispute over palace records. Instead, he heard words that left him completely motionless. A court official confirmed that Queen Elizabeth II had signed a private decree restricting Camilla's access to the late monarch's personal archives, family directives, and protected correspondence, and that the document had been concealed after the Queen's death. William did not argue. He did not move. He simply stared across the room as the meaning became impossible to escape. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The hearing had been called to settle control of the Queen's papers, but it became far more dangerous. A private decree was a signed personal order governing her property and records, and this one barred Camilla from controlling, removing, reviewing, or approving the release of Elizabeth's correspondence and family instructions. The court stated that she received it, hid it from the executors, and let palace decisions continue without the restriction. William sat with one hand beside an unopened folder while the judge read the final paragraph. When Camilla's name was spoken, his fingers tightened against the table. Catherine watched the change in him. His grandmother had trusted him with a duty kept from him. The decree transferred control to him, Princess Anne, and an independent royal archivist, a neutral expert responsible for protecting records without serving one household. Charles turned toward his wife and waited. Camilla did not answer. The king had defended choices made after his mother's death, believing they rested on lawful authority, yet the document showed that the ground beneath them had been false. His confusion hardened into humiliation as he realized the concealment had used his reign as cover. Officials produced a sealed blue envelope recovered from Elizabeth's household legal cabinet. Across the front, the Queen had written that it must be delivered to William immediately after her death. The seal had been broken, but no delivery had been recorded. Then came the storage receipt. Camilla's initials appeared beside the date the envelope entered her household's custody. The judge asked whether she disputed receiving it. Camilla placed her pen on the table and looked toward Charles. He refused to meet her eyes. William raised his head, but his silence struck harder than anger. Before the hearing paused, the court revealed that the decree referred to a handwritten memorandum explaining why Elizabeth imposed the restriction. That second document had also been recovered. William had just learned what Camilla concealed, but the deeper wound was waiting inside the Queen's own explanation of whom she trusted and whom she had quietly feared. The decree did more than expose a concealed document. It forced 4 members of the royal family to confront 4 different betrayals. William saw a final duty stolen from him. Charles saw his authority used as protection for a secret. Camilla saw years of carefully maintained influence begin to collapse. And Princess Anne saw proof that her mother's final wishes had been ignored. Inside that silent courtroom, the monarchy was no longer facing a paperwork dispute. It was facing a family reckoning. William carried the shock into the corridor. Catherine followed and found him staring at Elizabeth's instruction that the envelope be given to him without delay. A decree, in simple terms, was the Queen's written order, and this one named him guardian of her most private records. That mattered because it proved she trusted the prince with the family's sensitive truth, not just its future. The princess gently closed the folder and told him the delay could not erase the Queen's choice. Her words steadied him, but not his anger. Charles faced a different wound in the waiting room. He stood by the window while Camilla, in a recorded conversation later placed before the court, tried to explain that the envelope arrived amid confusion after the funeral. The king asked one question: why was William never told? She spoke of timing and pressure, yet never answered plainly. His shoulders dropped as the silence confirmed what he feared. His own authority had been used as cover. Anne felt no uncertainty. She understood why her mother had named her joint protector, meaning she shared legal responsibility for guarding the archive. An independent archivist, a neutral keeper of records answerable to rules, not a household, stood beside that safeguard for the same reason. In a documented account submitted to the hearing, the princess recalled asking weeks after the funeral about a missing register and being told no separate instruction existed. Now she knew that answer had been false. Camilla had much to lose if the decree stood. Several decisions after the Queen's death had benefited her household, including restrictions on Diana correspondence, limits on journals, and the reclassification of family letters. Anne stepped into her path as they left the chamber and spoke without raising her voice. Their mother had written William's name on the envelope herself, she said. The Queen Consort replied that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. Anne answered that obedience was not complicated. To understand why the Queen signed such a decree, the court would have to return to the night when a locked cabinet, a missing letter, and one furious exchange pushed Elizabeth beyond the point of trust. The decree was not born from vague suspicion. It began with one precise moment at Windsor Castle, 11 months before Queen Elizabeth II died. A private letter connected to Princess Diana disappeared from a protected cabinet hours before William was due to read it. The Queen demanded answers. Camilla entered the room. The door closed. What was said inside never reached the public, but Elizabeth emerged with a decision already forming. A decision that would later become the hidden decree, now tearing the family apart. William arrived for an archive review, believing his grandmother wanted to guide him through Diana's words about her son's future roles. An archive review was a controlled examination of protected records, and this one mattered because the letter carried a mother's hopes for the men they would become. Yet when Elizabeth opened the cabinet, the sealed document was gone. The register showed it had been there the night before. Security records deepened it. A member of Camilla's staff had entered that day, claiming to check material for an exhibition. The employee had no authority over Diana's collection, but access had been approved through the Queen Consort's household. Elizabeth summoned Camilla without Charles, aides, or secretaries. She placed the empty sleeve on the table and demanded to know who had authorized the removal. Camilla insisted she knew nothing about the letter. The monarch answered that ignorance could not be used as authority. William waited in the adjoining room and heard his grandmother's voice rise only once. Camilla emerged without meeting his eyes. Elizabeth later told him the letter would be found, yet the assurance sounded strained. The missing page proved that even her history could be quietly touched by someone else's ambition. 2 days later, the letter reappeared inside another file. Its wax seal had been disturbed, and Diana's handwritten note was missing. No one admitted returning it. Elizabeth ordered the cabinet locked and access logs preserved. She wrote a memorandum, a written record of her reasoning, warning that history must never be controlled by those protecting their own position. She ordered that William decide when Diana's correspondence could be reviewed. Anne watched her mother remove her glasses, reread the page, and sign. Elizabeth pressed her hand over the paper before telling her daughter that trust, once compromised, had to be replaced by rules. Months later, Camilla learned restrictions were being prepared and appealed to Charles, arguing that they would humiliate her and divide the household. The missing letter created the decree, but it was Camilla's attempt to escape its consequences that would bring William, Charles, and Anne into the same room for the confrontation none of them could avoid. For hours, William had remained silent. Then the court granted the family a private recess, and the prince asked for one room, with no lawyers present. Charles entered first. Camilla followed. Anne closed the door behind them. What happened next was not a royal consultation or a legal negotiation. It was a grandson demanding to know why his grandmother's final command had been hidden, and a woman realizing that every careful explanation had finally run out of space. William placed the decree on a small table and refused every distraction. He wanted no discussion of public image, constitutional damage, or palace timing. A constitutional concern, in simple terms, was any issue that could affect how the monarchy's powers and duties were understood, but he would not let that language bury the human truth. He asked Camilla when she first saw the document, and why she ignored Elizabeth's direct order to deliver it. Camilla answered through a recorded account, later included in the court file. She said the envelope arrived during the chaotic transfer of the Queen's private possessions, and insisted she believed the decree was provisional, meaning it might still be changed before taking full effect. She feared its release would ignite a battle between Charles and William while the country was still mourning. The prince rejected that defense immediately. She had not protected the king, he said. She had taken a decision that belonged to Elizabeth and stolen his chance to obey her. Charles finally turned toward his wife. He asked whether she had ever intended to reveal the decree. Camilla said she was waiting for the right moment. The king replied that no right moment could exist after the document had already shaped private decisions. His voice remained low, but the admission was brutal. His trust had helped the concealment survive. Anne pressed harder. Camilla then admitted she had read Elizabeth's handwritten memorandum and knew the restriction came from the missing Diana letter. She also confirmed that a palace lawyer had advised her to send the decree to the executors, the people legally responsible for carrying out the Queen's wishes. Instead, she ordered it kept inside her household's secure cabinet until Charles had settled into his reign. Camilla reached toward the decree. William pulled the empty chair aside and took the document first. He told her she had already held it long enough. Charles closed his eyes. Anne stayed beside the door. Now the court could expose deception, but only the monarch could impose lasting consequences. The confrontation exposed the truth, but truth alone carried no consequence until Charles decided whose authority would govern the palace: his wife's influence or his mother's final written will. Camilla had concealed the decree, but she could not erase the power sealed inside it. Elizabeth had anticipated resistance. She had named protectors, established an independent chain of custody, and left instructions that even the sovereign could not quietly rewrite without triggering judicial review. The document was more than a restriction. It was a trap built from experience. And as Charles studied the clauses, he realized his mother had prepared for the possibility that someone close to the throne might refuse to obey. Charles read the legal structure twice. The protected archive placed Elizabeth's letters, diaries, family instructions, and correspondence under 3 authorities: William, Anne, and an independent archivist. That role meant a professional responsible for preserving records without serving one royal household. Any 2 guardians could approve access, but no household could remove material alone. The safeguard mattered because it blocked private influence from becoming permanent control. The king could not simply cancel it. Elizabeth's private estate meant property she owned personally, separate from the institutional crown and its official powers. Charles held the throne, yet he did not own the right to rewrite the conditions attached to her papers. Any challenge would require judicial review, a court process examining whether the decree had been lawfully created and enforced. That risked exposing even more evidence. Charles reached the clause, stating that affection must never replace accountability. He set the file down and pressed his thumb against a word his mother had corrected by hand. The mark made her feel near. Later, in a documented private exchange, he asked Anne whether Camilla could retain a ceremonial role. His sister refused. Ceremony, she said, was how influence had entered the archive. Their mother had left a boundary, not a suggestion. The decree then delivered its hidden blow. Any household that concealed or interfered with protected material lost access for 12 months, while an independent audit examined every action. An audit was a review of records, decisions, and authority. Because Camilla had withheld the decree itself, the punishment had already begun. The court froze archive transfers, publication permissions, exhibition loans, and the planned movement of Diana's correspondence. William received the sign of that change when the archivist placed a numbered key and written inventory before him. Catherine watched as he hesitated, signed the register, and accepted the duty Elizabeth had chosen for him. Behind closed doors, Camilla asked Charles not to let one document define their marriage. The king answered that it was defining his reign. By the end of the day, the Queen's command had become active, the archive had changed hands, and Camilla was about to discover what losing influence looked like in real time. The first consequence did not arrive as a grand announcement. It came as a quiet knock at Camilla's office door. 2 officials entered, carrying an inventory and a sealed case. Her archive credentials were cancelled. Her approval authority was suspended. The private keys she had used for nearly 4 years had to be surrendered before sunset. Camilla listened without interrupting, but when the final key left her hand, the reality became unmistakable. The palace was no longer asking for her cooperation. It was enforcing Elizabeth's command. Camilla remained seated after the officials left. The decree's enforcement provision, the part of the order that automatically imposed punishment when its rules were broken, had removed her from every role involving Elizabeth's private estate, correspondence, historical exhibitions, connected family trusts, and approval of archive access. The loss mattered because these duties had given the queen consort influence over how the late monarch's story was protected and presented. Now that influence had vanished in one afternoon. An independent audit began immediately. An audit was a formal review comparing files, digital records, calendars, and staff testimony to discover what had been moved, copied, restricted, or renamed. Officials examined every decision made through Camilla's household after Elizabeth's death. A longtime aide asked whether a statement should be prepared. Camilla stared at the empty key tray and whispered that years of service had been reduced to one mistake. The aide stayed silent. The court had called it a choice. Charles entered and found his wife alone. Camilla asked whether he believed she had intended harm. The king answered that he believed she had intended to control the moment. She insisted she had tried to stop the family from breaking apart. He told her concealment had broken it more completely. Neither raised a voice, but the distance between them felt larger than the room. The audit then uncovered 3 absences: Diana's detached handwritten note, a private letter meant for William, and a memorandum about the future role of the queen consort. A digital log showed that the memorandum had been scanned on a device assigned to Camilla's private secretary, yet the copy never entered the official archive database. Anne arrived with the archivist and watched the remaining boxes counted. She closed the cabinet, turned the key, and fixed Elizabeth's original seal across the handle. William stood beside her, caught between relief and grief. Camilla then requested one private meeting with him. Charles objected, but the prince agreed. He needed to hear her without protection. The doors had closed, the keys had changed hands, and only one meeting remained before William decided whether Camilla's confession deserved mercy or merely confirmed the Queen's warning. William agreed to meet Camilla under one condition: no lawyers, no aides, and no royal titles between them. They sat across from each other in a small room where neither rank nor ceremony could soften the truth. For the first time since the decree was revealed, Camilla did not defend the delay as palace necessity. She admitted fear. She had read Elizabeth's warning, recognized herself inside it, and hidden the document because she could not bear to watch the Queen's distrust become official. William left the decree outside and carried only Elizabeth's handwritten memorandum inside. A memorandum was a written record of reasons and instructions, and it explained why the Queen had chosen him to protect her papers. Camilla arrived alone and sat opposite him. The prince said the suspension was final. He wanted truth, not protected appearances, and he refused to let palace language hide the injury. Camilla gave it through a recorded private conversation later added to the court file. She said the decree felt like a final rejection from a woman whose acceptance she had spent decades trying to earn. Revealing it would have forced Charles to face his mother's distrust. It would revive every comparison with Diana. The queen consort feared humiliation, exclusion, and losing her place. William answered without softness. Elizabeth had the right to record her judgment, just as Diana had the right to leave words for her sons. Camilla's fear gave her no right to control what he inherited from either woman. His voice broke when he said she had taken away his grandmother's final act of trust. Camilla then revealed where the missing note had gone. She said it was inside a red archival box, transferred to Clarence House after the Windsor incident. An archival box was a protected container, preserving sensitive records, and she gave him its exact number. She had been too afraid to return it once the decree existed, knowing discovery would expose everything. William and Anne opened the box with the archivist present. Inside was Diana's handwritten message asking that her sons understand her life without anyone softening the difficult parts. The prince read it twice, then covered the page with his hand. Camilla asked whether he could forgive her. William answered that forgiveness might come privately, but trust had to be rebuilt publicly through obedience. He opened the door without offering his hand. She then told Charles she would not challenge the suspension, and would sign a formal acknowledgement. The private confession recovered Diana's missing words, but the monarchy still had to face millions of people who were about to learn that Elizabeth's final boundary had been concealed inside her own family. By morning, the secret had escaped the courtroom. Across Britain, one image dominated television screens. William standing rigid on the court steps, the decree held against his chest, while Charles and Camilla emerged several paces behind him. No one needed to hear the private argument to understand the distance between them. The hidden document had become a national symbol, one final instruction from Elizabeth, one painful silence from her family, and one question about whether the monarchy still obeyed its own rules. Buckingham Palace moved first. Its statement confirmed that Elizabeth's private decree had not been transferred according to her instructions, suspended Camilla from duties involving the late Queen's personal archive, and recognized William and Anne as its lawful protectors. A lawful protector, in simple terms, was someone formally authorized to guard records and approve access. The announcement mattered because it admitted the failure openly, and because it placed the future king and his aunt above household influence. Charles watched the coverage from a private office as one broadcaster called the concealment the greatest test of his judgment since taking the throne. He switched off the screen before the segment ended and canceled that evening's reception. The king knew the story was no longer only about Camilla. It was about whether his reign had allowed loyalty to replace duty. William carried the strain into a scheduled charity engagement hours later. A young volunteer mentioned Elizabeth, and the prince paused before saying that promises matter most when keeping them is difficult. His answer was brief, but the grief beneath it was clear. He had gained the responsibility his grandmother intended, yet only after learning how completely her command had been delayed. The public seized on one image. A national newspaper printed Elizabeth's handwritten instruction beside William's stunned courtroom expression under the headline, "Her Final Order, Hidden." Outside Buckingham Palace, copies rose above the crowd. At Windsor Castle, visitors left white roses beside her photograph, and one woman placed a card beneath it reading, "Her words should have reached her grandson." Cameras captured the message, turning it into the day's defining symbol. Camilla then signed a written acknowledgement stating that she had received the envelope, delayed its transfer, and accepted the restrictions imposed by the decree. She blamed no aid, no confusion, and no legal advice. Charles watched her sign but did not intervene. Then he summoned William, Anne, and Camilla to Windsor for one final family session. There would be no advisors between them this time. The country had delivered its judgment in headlines, flowers, and silence. But the final verdict still belonged to the family gathered beneath the same roof where Elizabeth's trust had first been broken. The final meeting lasted less than an hour, yet it settled a conflict that had been growing since the Windsor cabinet was opened. Charles sat at the head of the table, but Elizabeth's decree governed every decision made inside the room. William wanted accountability. Anne demanded obedience. Camilla accepted that her influence had crossed a boundary. And the king faced the choice that would define the crisis: protect the appearance of unity, or restore the authority of the mother whose final command had been ignored. Charles delivered the verdict without ceremony. Camilla's suspension from Elizabeth's private archive would remain for 12 months. After that, she could request supervised access, but she would never again control the Queen's correspondence, Diana-related material, or family instructions alone. Supervised access meant she could review approved records only while an authorized guardian was present. William and Anne received permanent control beside the independent archivist. Every movement of protected material would now require 2 signatures, a recorded reason and an inventory listing the decision without exposing the contents. This safeguard ensured no future decision could disappear behind palace silence. Charles turned to his son after the papers were signed. In a recorded account, the king admitted that he should have asked harder questions when archive decisions were made in his name. He said protecting family harmony had become an excuse for avoiding truth. William accepted the apology, but warned that trust would depend on what happened after everyone left the room. Camilla then faced the prince. She said she would not challenge the decree, the audit, or the recovery of Diana's note. She asked for no public forgiveness, finally accepting the difference between influence and entitlement. William returned Diana's message to the protected collection. He read its final line once more and told Anne that neither their mother's pain nor their grandmother's caution would ever be softened for anyone's comfort. Charles made Elizabeth's decree, the archive's permanent governing charter, its lasting controlling rule. William placed the decree, the memorandum, Diana's letter, and the recovered note inside the restored cabinet. Anne stood beside him as he turned the key. He pressed his palm against the door and said their words were safe now. The monarchy survived because accountability stood above image, private loyalty, fear, and the comfort of silence itself. The decree had been hidden, the family had been shaken, and trust had been damaged. But when William locked the cabinet, Elizabeth's final command was no longer a secret. It was the rule the monarchy had finally chosen to obey. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.